Hello everyone. So I had an idea for a block and I didn't know if it would work out, and I tried this multiple times before I was finally happy with the results. So I did keep track of all my measurements on the one that did finally work, but I will leave all of those measurements in the description box down below because they are a little bit odd sized and I didn't have a pattern, and I'm not a professional quilter. I'm not a pattern writer or anything. So I'm just going to start with my bottom row here, and I'm going to take my tree piece or my centerpiece and I'm going to fold it in half and making sure that the wrong sides are touching here. And I'm going to lay that on top of one of my background pieces, making sure that all of my edges are lined up nice and neat. And then I'm going to take my next background piece and lay that pretty sides down on top of all of that. So all of our pretty sides of the fabric should be touching at this point. And I'm just going to pop some clips on here just to hold it into place. And I will be sewing that with a 1/4 inch seam along with everything else in this block or pattern, whatever you want to call it. Like I said, it's made up. So all of my rows here, or at least the top 3 rows, are put together the exact same way. You take your centerpiece, fold it in half, and making sure that that folded edge is not going to get sewn, if that makes sense. If you just watch the way I place it, it should all work out. Like I said, I'm not professional, I'm self-taught. And here I realize that I'm putting clips on and then I don't even have my other piece on. So don't do that. Make sure you have all of your layers together. So we're just going to sandwich that together as well and put it there and put some pins or clips on. You can use pins if you want. I'm going to put all of my rows together and then I'm going to take them over to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew that with a 1/4 inch seam, and then I will show you the next step. All right, now that I have sewn those all with a 1/4 inch seam, I'm going to give these a good press. So I'm just going to be opening this up and then we're going to be folding it down. Like if you just open up this little piece here and if you place everything correctly, it should work. And the first time I did it, I hadn't placed it correctly and it didn't work, but now it did. Basically, if you've ever done a one seam flying geese, this is where this method kind of came from. But I'm just going to make sure that I am folding it with my fingers and pressing it down, making sure it's all nice and neat and even before I iron it because I want this to look as nice as possible. And as you can see, my green is overhanging by quite a bit. And it seemed like no matter what I did, I couldn't figure out how to make that work. Maybe there's someone out there who's smarter than me and can figure that out. But I figured, you know what? I'm just going to trim that off after. So I'm just going to do the exact same thing with my other 2 rows. I'm just going to open them up. And you will notice that my top row, I have a little bit more space between the top of my row and the top of my tree point. But that was just because I wanted it that way. But these I needed to have at a 1/4 inch so that they would meet up at the seams. But again, I'm just laying everything out nice and neat and making sure it's all lined up. And then I'm just going to give it a good press with the iron. And then we'll move on to the next step. And if you enjoy these kind of videos, I would really appreciate it if you would hit the like button and consider subscribing if you haven't already. If you've watched any of my videos, you know I just kind of wing it and go with the flow. And on occasion, I do follow patterns. But I like to experiment and I'm okay with screwing up and ending up with more scraps because I do like making scrappy quilts. But anyways, let's move on. All right, now that we have everything pressed, we are ready to trim up our little pieces here. You can kind of see what I'm going for here. I did try this in a bigger format and it did not look good, not in my opinion anyways. But before I move on, I am just going to take a ruler and I'm just going to trim off all of that excess there just so that's out of the way. All right, now that I have all of my rows ready to be sewn together, I am going to get to work on that. And this is just your basic stuff. Lay it right sides together and I'm just going to make sure that I line up my center points, and I've got my kids in my sewing room with me today, so there's a lot of distractions happening in here. And like always, I am going to try to nest my seams. And because we did do the one seam method here, it's going to be a lot bulkier, just so you know and you're aware of that because it's a lot more layers of fabric that you have piled up in one spot. But I'm just going to make sure that I'm lining everything up nice and neat. And then because our little tree points are loose, we want to make sure that we're going to be clipping those down. You want to make sure that they're down because when you're sewing them, you wouldn't want them to flip up and then, well, then you got to unpick it and redo it. But I'm just going to lay these all together and clip them. And then I'm going to take them over to the sewing machine and sew them with a 1/4 inch seam. And then once I have all my rows sewn together, we will give it a good press. All right, so now I have all my rows sewn together and I'm just going to take my iron and press them. But before I do, I always make sure that my points are lining up and that I didn't lose any points there because I would correct that if it was too much of a space or too much of the point gone, then I would fix it. If it's just a little bit, then I'll leave it because I don't really care. But anyways, I'm just going to give this a good press and then we're going to move on to building a trunk for our little tree. Okay, I have all of my pieces cut here. I will leave these measurements in the description box below as well. So I'm just going to sew these together and finish this piece up, and then we will sew this row to the rest of our tree here. So it turned out my math is incorrect. I was off by a little bit and I've adjusted it. So it will have the correct measurements in the description box below. But for mine here, I'm just going to trim off the excess. So I'm just going to make sure that I'm going to line everything up and make sure that I have my center point with my center point of my trunk. And then I'm just going to pop some clips on there and go sew that with a 1/4 inch seam. All right, so I had sewn everything together and my top pieces were hanging over a little bit more than my trunk pieces. So I'm just going to trim these up, but you should not have to do this. All the measurements should be correct now in the description box below. All right, now you're going to understand why I wanted to do the one seam method so that my little points or my flying geese pieces, you want to call it, whatever you want to call them at this point, would be loose here. I wanted to fold them over so that they had that little curve there. I got this idea from a reel that I saw on Instagram. I will actually leave a link to that reel in the description box below as well, just to give credit where the idea came from. This was not like, oh, I had this beautiful, wonderful idea. No, I got this from someone else. She did not make trees, she just made flying geese blocks. But I was just like, hey, this might actually look cute as a little tree. But anyways, so you just want to fold it over just so you get that nice little curve there. And I'm going to be using my iron to give it a little press so that I have the little memory crease there. You could pin these in place. And then you have the option of sewing them down with your sewing machine or hand sewing them down. I will be hand sewing them just because, well, I feel like having a little project to do while I'm sitting upstairs on the couch. So I'm just going to go and give all of them a little press so that the memory crease is there. And then I'm just going to put this together. I'm just going to make a tiny little wall quilt with this. I had nothing specific planned. I just wanted to see if this worked. It was an epic fail my first time. The second time wasn't so bad. Third time I was finally happy with it. But yeah, I don't think I will show you my first attempt. No, unless you guys really want to. I didn't even finish it. It was so bad. But anyways, I will quit yakking here and move on. Okay, so this is what it looks like at this point. So you can just see that I have that little crease there, and that should be enough for me to know where I want to fold it. Okay, I have my little quilt sandwich made here. I found this green fabric in my stash. I figured that would be a good backing. I made myself a nice bright red binding. So I'm just going to go and do some hand sewing on this. It's not going to be fancy. And then I will show you what it looks like when it's all done. And here it is. It is all done. It's not 100% perfect, but you know what? That's okay. I just did a very minimal sewing on there. I just sewed my curves down. And then I haven't done anything in the background. I figured I could maybe do it later. I did add some little sleeves here in the back so that I could hang it on the wall. And you know, it would probably look cute with some buttons on there for like little ornaments or like a little star button if you could find one. But that's all I have for today. Thanks for stopping by, and until next time.